What's up guys, it's Lou here, hope you are doing great. One of the biggest lies that we were told as kids or young adults is that your primary residence or your house is your biggest asset. This is simply not true because an asset is something that puts money in your pocket, or it's something that can generate profit, that can pay you a dividend or an interest amount each and every year or month, where a liability is something that does the exact opposite. It's something that costs you money each and every month that will come out of your own salary. Most people will go ahead and buy a property with the income that they earn from their work, and they will think that this property is going to make them very wealthy. Yes, over the long term, if you hold on to that property, you will receive a pretty good amount of appreciation. But at the end of the day, let's imagine you work for a salary and you lose your job, or you get retrenched, or something happens and you can't work anymore. How are you going to be able to pay for that property? It's something that costs you money. You need to be able to pay for that loan each and every month. And if you can't make your payment, just have a look at who actually owns the property. That's going to be the bank. If we have a look at the traditional income statement, something that Robert Kiyosaki of Rich Dad Poor Dad talks about a lot, and it's something that changed my mentality completely. Most poor people will receive an income and they will spend their income on all of their expenses. So they don't own any assets and they don't own any liabilities. Majority of South Africans follow this income statement. Then we have a look at the middle class, which will still receive an income, and that person will buy a liability which forms part of their expenses, and it goes from income to liabilities out as an expense, meaning that they aren't really better off than the normal poor person, but they think they own an asset because they own their house. Then you get a rich person, or let's call them the smart person, which receives an income, and with their income they buy an asset, and that asset produces more income for them, and with the extra income that person will go and buy a liability, and that liability forms part of their expenses. But the difference is they first buy an asset that can produce income to pay for the liability. And if you don't understand this basic concept, you are definitely missing something. This is very important because at the end of the day, most people end up selling their properties or their primary residence because they simply can't afford making the payments. Just remember, this is my opinion, but if you like the way that I'm explaining things and you learn at least one or two things, please consider liking this video, share it with your friends, and maybe consider subscribing to the channel. With that said, I personally own my primary residence, and I know it might seem weird because I'm talking about why you shouldn't own your primary residence, but that's why I make these videos, to share my opinion. You obviously need to live somewhere, right? If you rent a property, that also costs you money, and you also need to take that from your income, or it can form part of the income that you generate from your assets. So the idea is you need to sleep somewhere, you need to have a roof over your head, so you obviously have to pay rent. My reasoning behind this whole thing is that you can own your primary residence, and your primary residence can be a beneficial towards growing your net worth in the longer term if you set it up correctly. And just hear me out. So again, like I said, I live in my primary residence, but it was not necessarily just a random property that I bought, and I was very specific at what type of property I want to look at. And I'm going to share 3 things that you can look at before you buy your primary residence. And whether you already own your primary residence, maybe you can structure it in such a way that it can be beneficial towards your net worth in the longer term. The first thing is you need to buy a property that falls within your renting budget. And this is the way that I look at it. We used to rent a property, let's say for example, for 10,000 Rand a month. I had to pay 10,000 Rand towards a different landlord each and every month without having any benefit. So I decided to look for a property that I can buy that will cost me 10,000 Rand all in, meaning your rates and taxes as well as your levies as well as your bond. We found a property that was listed for, let's say, R1,000,000, and I was able to buy the property for a discount. And this is the second thing that you need to consider. If you find a property that falls within your renting budget, make sure you buy that property at a discount. That discount amount forms part of your equity. Equity forms part of your net worth, and your equity portion can be used as a reserve or even to expand your property portfolio. So I was able to buy a property for cheaper than what it was worth. It fell in my renting budget, and then I decided to set it up in such a way that I can benefit in the most ways possible. And what I did was to buy the property within a trust. So the trust was the sole owner of this property, meaning I as Louis did not own anything, and I really do look quite poor in my own personal name. And the property was owned by the trust, which we will call the landlord. Then the property trust as the landlord rented the property to me as Louis, and I pay rent monthly to the landlord. And this is a great way to benefit in both entities, because in my personal name I can deduct my rent as an expense because I am a business owner or because I work from home. I can deduct that from my income, reducing my taxes, and within the property trust I can declare it as an income, which helps my property portfolio grow. So the idea would be to buy within your renting budget, buy at a discount, and set it up in such a way that you can rent from your own property. By doing this, we protect ourselves, we get the most tax benefits, and we technically stick within our budget. Yes, it is still a liability. Yes, it is costing me money every month, but again, we need to live somewhere. I would rather own a cheaper, a smaller, and not as fancy property instead of paying a landlord every year a load of money, and I don't really benefit from it at all. But the problem is that most people forget the first rule and they don't buy a property within their renting budget. Especially in COVID, people went ahead and went from a 10,000 Rand per month renting budget to a 20,000 Rand bond repayment, because we have this emotional issue of for 2,000 Rand we can get an extra bedroom. For 4,000 Rand we can get 2 extra bedrooms as well as a double garage. And we keep upgrading our lifestyle although our income stays the same. So this is the main thing that you need to avoid. Do not overextend yourself, because at the end of the day, there's so many people that I talk to and consult with that end up selling their properties because they can't afford it.
I had all the time in the world, and I could spend it as I see fit. I would travel for a year. I would take all of the pressure